Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Way T Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. And we have a return guest coming back here today. And we were talking about this, the pronunciation of Italian words. And some people would say it's Joe DiStefano, but he likes DiStefano. And he runs a really interesting business. He's a fitness expert, a lifestyle coach, nearly 2 decades of coaching experience. Had a traumatic brain injury. So people who have suffered from brain injuries, this is something you want to listen to. Or if you know somebody, he's dedicated his life to restoring his health and vitality, a journey that resulted in Joe's highly unique method to sustainable happiness. A lot of people struggling with that right now, combining breathwork and mindfulness, cold immersion, intermittent fasting, sleep optimization, and kettlebell training. Joe has developed a reliable program to foster the highest levels of well-being in his clients. Joe is the host of Stacked and is the founder of RUNGA, an experiential lifestyle and online community brand that empowers individuals through highly effective and sustainable practices that fuel health, wellness, and performance. Joe, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Wade. Hey, glad to be here. Excited.
Well, you're one of the unusual characters. In the last time we've talked, you were literally living on my street. I think the first early on, then you were in Europe, and now you are in beautiful Austin, Texas, seems to be one of the great meccas of the world now since the whole COVID thing started, where we have all sorts of people now have descended onto Austin. A lot of, I would say, California refugees. How is things in Austin these days?
It's awesome, and it's so interesting. The number of people that live here that used to live literally up the street from us when we lived right where you live now in Venice. It's pretty cool. It's pretty refreshing. And like you said, with just the convergence on Austin, right? Because, it's always been, over the last decade, a real hot spot for wellness, and a lot of wellness brands have been founded here and live here. And so it's kind of, I think, always been like number 2 or 3 behind LA. But, with all the COVID stuff, anybody that was, thinking about Austin in any capacity pretty much jumped shipped, and now they're here. So it's been cool, and it's been great to kind of have community again. I think that was something that was missing from all of our 2020. And so, especially now, we have a 1-year-old boy, and having community with young kids and that think the same way about the, things that are going on in the world right now, and are able to have conversations around health and wellness and kind of a safe place to be. So yeah, no, we're digging it, man.
Now, we were just chatting before we got talking here, and you just had an event recently, and you want to talk about what you're doing right now. And of course, it was one of the first events in a long time where you're actually doing things with people, kind of empowering all the things that you do. You want to talk about that particularly, because I think there's a lot of people out there. And the reason why I want to couch is probably a lot of people out there, I think the average weight gain is now 30 pounds since the lockdown started. That's what the researchers, we know that the comorbidities around COVID, 78% of the people, it's obesity. So we kept McDonald's and Burger King open. We closed down gyms and, a lot of stores and restaurants and mom and pop shops where you get more healthier stuff. And we went all through these big box stores. So it seems like the strategy was somewhat flawed as far as a health perspective, but you're on the cutting edge of incorporating a lifestyle. Can you talk about your events in particular, and the one maybe that you just ran? How was that? What was it about? And what were the type of people that were coming to that?
Yeah. Great question, Wade. And the stats you just rifled off, it's really unbelievable. The approach, the fact that there was really no health and wellness guidance, no nutritional mentions, no therapeutic, interventions or nutrient.
Can I interject on that for a minute? Yeah. Because this is a point that I need to make to listeners. the government is not capable of mandating what you need to do for your health. Your doctor is not capable of outlining a program for your health. Your education system in your schooling is not capable of providing this. And it's about time that the population stop relying on large, centralized institutions for their health, their wellness, and their education advice, because it's quite obvious that they are controlled by special interest groups, infighting in political organizations, inefficiency due to lack of accountability, the lack of evolutionary component, and a laundry list of ideas. And it is impossible for any institution, be it government or on a local, state, national level, to address these issues. And if there's one thing that we can take away from this one thing, this is me on my rant box, folks, today. There's one thing that we can take away from this whole thing is how poorly equipped our authoritarian institutions are to address the basic needs of health and wellness. And that's why people like you are so critical, because if we continue to do the same thing over and over again and expect the same result, that is the definition of insanity. And it's obvious to me, and this is not a political statement, because it doesn't matter which political group is in. It doesn't matter which education board. It doesn't matter what new theory they're implementing into the school system. It doesn't address health. It just doesn't. In fact, if you follow their mandates, there's one thing that we will guarantee that you'll get. That is, you're going to get fat, you're going to get sick, and you're going to suffer from a debilitating condition by the time you're 60 years old. And that you're going to spend the last 10, 15, 20 years of your life, if you're lucky, in some compromised state. That's coming out of the New England Journal of Medicine in Professor Oshansky's things. So you're dealing with this directly. Like, you're one of the first events. People are screwed up. They've been depressed. They've been locked in their houses. They've been terrorized with the media about the current situations. They've gained weight. They maybe not be thinking, what was that like? What did you do? And how did that go? So sorry to interrupt, but I'm just on a, it's like, we got to stop turning over our authorities to these institutional ideas that are completely compromised and incapable of directing our goals to achieve wellness.
You hit the nail on the head, Wade. And, you know, just in the past month, as an example to what you're saying, I've had 2 phone calls and meetings with people who have had their life insurance canceled, or their spouse had their life insurance canceled after receiving a clean bill of health from their doctor. And their life insurance basically diagnosed them with COVID, because the life insurance has something to lose. And they're looking at the blood work much more meticulously, much more. They're looking at it through the lens of somebody with something to lose. But the doc, the shirt, the white jacket, the degree, they've got nothing to lose. So if you go get cancer next year, your doctor doesn't really care, it doesn't seem. But the insurance company that's gonna insure you for a couple of $1 million, like, they're going to say, hey, like, look at this PSA, look at this, you know, look at what's going on here. That could be this type of trend. So anyways, that kind of told me everything I needed to know. And it illustrates what you're saying exactly. So in Austin, you know, we've done events in Napa for the last bunch of years. That's pretty much where we've focused, but obviously California is just not friendly to us right now. And it's not a place that a lot of people want to go, but guess what? Texas is open for business. And we have been, like you said, we have not had a live event since late 2019, because our events, you know, first of all, we were pregnant when COVID hit, and the whole thing. So we had kind of this little gap in our schedule. And then when things were supposed to ramp back up, guess what? They didn't. So we've been itching, because this is how we live. This is our life. This is our purpose here on this planet, is to meet with people, connect people with modalities, therapies, interventions, exercises, and so they can take their health into their own hands, which is exactly what you're saying. And so we were super fortunate for this group to come in. It wasn't a public event. Our next public event is in October, but private stuff, corporate stuff, rolls in as it will. And this one started as a 8-person corporate event, but by the time the event rolled around, we had 30 people that were family members, friends, and corporate partners for this, the person that brought us in, who essentially, he had come through a public event in 2018, and he knows the state of the world right now, and he knows what our events are capable of. So he brought everybody that he knows and everyone in his circle who he wants to see make change in their life and change their diets, change their exercise, etc. So when people came in, we had this group of 30 for a whole week. And when they came in, most of them had never eaten like this before. They had never intermittent fasted. They had really never focused on 100% organic diets. They had never really exercised properly. And so the really interesting thing is, our events are normally 3 nights, 4 days. This one was a full week. We saw massive change. And now just about every guest I'm sending them, I made a landing page just for their group. Here's all the supplements you took. Here's the exercise programs we did. Here's what you need to do next. So we're going to kind of keep the guardrails on for these folks. But essentially, Wade, when people come into our event, and first of all, we're big on hugs. We're big on really sharing all we have, creating an extremely safe environment. And I mean that in the pre-COVID emotional sense of the word, because when you're either learning new exercises or eating a new way, your digestion's impacted by your feelings of safety. And if you're in a new place, surrounded by new people, so that's why things like our welcome circle and the different things that we do along the way to make sure everyone feels maximally safe helps the upload of everything else we're going to do. But in a nutshell, across this week, every bite of food these people had was chef prepared, regenerative, organic, etc. We combined yoga, meditation, sound baths, kettlebell training with daily PEMF, hyperbaric oxygen, manual therapy, and nutrient IVs. And you bring someone in, and that's what they do for a week. Postures are different. Energies are different. Whites of eyes are different. Everything is different, right? And that's why I say, after a RUNGA experience, whether it's 4 days or a week, you've got basically 3 to 6 months of momentum before the job, the kids, the diet starts slipping again, because the impact or the experience is so great. And you actually, it's kind of like it's self-fulfilling, because when all the boxes are checked, all the boxes also work better. So you're getting more out of the hyperbaric oxygen when you had all your minerals and you're maximally hydrated. You just had an IV of NAD and whatever else. And then you go into the hyperbaric, you're going to feel after 4 or 5 hours in that thing across a week, you're going to start to really feel it. So everything acts as a multiplier to everything else. And that's why people can really feel, wow, this created a lot of change. And of course, when people leave, maybe they don't have a hyperbaric oxygen chamber in their house or, PEMF, but we give them things that they can sustain, whether it's, breath work, whether it's the idea of grounding outside, getting daily sun. And so there are ways, even though we can give you the latest modern technology and the way that we're going to get you, 10 hours of grounding or earthing in 45 minutes on this, on this PEMF device, you still get the idea of what your body's capable of and how you can feel in a matter of days or a week. So that's what we did. And we spared no hugs. Everyone that joined was on the same exact page. So it was late 2019, it felt just like that. And honestly, I couldn't be happier about that. It was so refreshing. The last thing I'll tack on, Wade, is every single member of my team worked over 100 hours in 6 days. And every single member of my team had more energy at the end than when we walked in the door, because this is what we live for. This is what we do. And by the way, it's so funny, it's so funny because I told my wife I'm going to take this week off, because, we're just so, we worked so much. And so she's laughing because today, as an example, is my day off. I've had 3 podcasts, 3 coaching calls, and I've got a live workout on Zoom when we're through. So it's just like, you don't know how to turn it off, but hey, that's it. That's hopefully when you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, that's how the world works.
What is the major challenge that people are dealing with when they're coming to see you? Like what is kind of like, who is the type of person that reaches out to your organization? What are their requirements and what are they hoping to get?
Great question. Well, a lot of people that come in, and there's of course a spectrum. We get folks like yourself. Like I could see you at an event, someone that just knows this stuff inside and out and wants a community of people that think that way. And so we get those types of people. We also get people that have whatever it is that's been kind of in the way of them achieving progress or achieving their goals or whatever. So a lot of times there's some sort of trauma, there's some sort of emotional barrier, there's some sort of relationship with food. And so that's where, when we look at the people that come in, and our public events, we have an application process, and we actually speak to every single person that wants to come through. And we actually curate a group of people that we think are going to work really well together, because those 3 to 4 day events, they're highly curated. The group kind of gets really close and really stays together. It's a really amazing experience. And so when we look at that, a lot of times we'll bring people that are dealing with similar issues, and they might be, the world away from each other, but at their core, they all need to kind of get in touch with the power inside of them. They all need to kind of they need to find some stillness. They need to quiet the mental chatter or the addiction to the latest and greatest, novel idea in health and wellness or diet. They need to kind of get down to the basics. And so one thing we do is we bring people back to the basics, but we demonstrate and instruct the basics in a way that tends to stick with people. So I will say that everyone that comes through has a profound interest in health and wellness. Many of them are like recovering Ironman, people that have just like put their body through the ringer, and they suspect that health and fitness might be different things. And so,
right. I want to go there for a second. Yeah. Sorry to cut you off. Do you want to finish that thought?
No, go for it.
Yeah. So this is something that I discovered, I believe, in 2003, when I went to the Mr. Universe after preparing for 16 years, and I was extremely fit. My VO2 max was great. My body fat was in the low single digits. I'm at the aesthetic ideals of the Mr. Universe. And so from all intents purposes, I was extremely fit, and people would think, well, they equate that with health. And then that set me up for my biggest health crisis of my life, where I gained 42 pounds of fat and water after the contest. And then that led to the discovery of digestive wellness and rebuilding myself 6 months later, which took 6 months and was the precursor to the foundation of Bioptimizers and what we're into. Right. From your perspective, how do you define the difference between fitness and health?
Great question, Wade. And I'm adjusting in my chair here because I can't sit still for very long.
Yep.
But so here's the thing, health, or I should say wellness, to me is what's happening kind of behind your eyes and between your ears, right? So when everything else falls away, is that energy inside there one of happiness? And I guess it's kind of the Einstein, is the world a friendly place, like the number one question. And so I guess that's wellness. And I think one of the interesting things is when we look at health, fitness, and wellness as different things, everyone knows that, that dying cancer patient that still has a positive impact on everyone that walks in the room. So your wellness is more the impact you have on others and the ability you have, the electrons you have to give.
That's right? That's a very cool definition. Wellness is like, how do you make people feel when they're in your presence? That's exactly. A very unique definition. I like that.
Yeah, you can be falling apart, you can be on your deathbed, and you can still have that positive impact on others. And that goes to show kind of what's happening in your own body and in your own mind and in your own conscious. Health, I would say, is more your ability to kind of do what you want to do and live how you want to live and not be medicated and eat food without problems. And so I guess it's more of a, kind of more conventional definition of health. And then fitness is, can you do the things you aspire to do? Can you achieve something that the average person can't? And so that's kind of how I look at them. And I think that there's a certain amount of overflow, but you can absolutely be fit as hell and sick as a dog. And you can be very, very, very healthy, but not very fit and not very well. These things are all mutually exclusive.
Where do you see specifically that crossover when fitness, say, the pursuit of fitness is compromising one's health? What's the earmarks of that you've noticed with people?
Yeah, well, I think when more workouts leave you tired than build your energy, that's kind of when you're on the path, right? And then there's this sort of maturity to take to know how to kind of balance that training program. But basically, if you think about the average person should probably have about 5 workouts a week. Do you leave more of those workouts with more energy than you walked in with, or do you leave those workouts with less energy than you walked in with? Because when more of your workouts are leaving you tired, that means you're maximizing in that area. So in other words, when you maximize in a single area, you're inevitably taking from other areas, right? So if you want to become maximally successful in your business, then maybe not you because you're in the health space, but the average person, let's take a Wall Street guy who wants to be maximally successful on Wall Street. Chances are he'll achieve his goal of being a millionaire by 30 or whatever his goal is, but he's probably going to be fat, divorced, and sick when he gets there, right? So that's a maximization strategy. And having coached a lot of professional endurance athletes, I've seen a lot of this stuff where the fitter somebody gets, as an example, a lot of female endurance athletes lose their period. They stop menstruating. They stop having their cycle. Well, that is a massive sign that our health is sinking as our fitness is climbing, right? So that's an extreme example, but I would say that at the point where your training is interfering with your daily life or your primary role on this planet, like for me as being a dad, if I was spending 5 hours a day in the gym and that's 5 hours I'm not with my son, and when I'm with my son, I'm tired, I'm maximizing in the area of fitness at the expense of my role as a parent or as a dad, right?
Right.
So I think that's kind of how you know. And then, if you just kind of intuit, like, are you doing these things for the right reason? And I think that this is where kind of periodization comes in and having a goal, whether it's climbing a mountain, whether it is a kettlebell event, whether it's a running race, whatever it might be. I think fitness also has to come in waves, like the best fighters in the world, they're not ready to fight today, but give them 12 weeks and they're in shape. Right. And so I think when we treat our fitness that way, and maybe we have 2 12-week blocks a year where we really chase it and we maximize in that area. And then the rest of the year, we dial back and we focus on our health. Maybe we focus on our family. So we kind of periodize all of the different roles and responsibilities that we have kind of more responsibly. But I think arbitrarily chasing maximal fitness without really accounting for where that time, energy, and resource is coming from is a slippery slope.
Would you say that a lot of people that are coming to you are looking to, they kind of know that they're out of balance in one of those areas and they're trying to get a new adjustment? And I think, and I know that you have a young baby in your house now. And I think for a lot of people, when they become a parent per se, there's a massive, shift in lifestyle. And there's a couple things. There's a couple things that I think are shifters, and we can kind of break these down. There is the one, getting involved in a relationship, which changes dynamics. Number 2, adding a family member. Number 3, having maybe a sick family member. Another one be change of career. And then another one would be aging. If I could think of 5 major components.
Yeah.
How do you approach that as a coach where people are coming in and they realize, okay, we've got to make an adjustment. So let's start with, you can pick any one that you like and how you would address that, or what you see with people when they're looking to make that retuning.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip: supercharge your protein shake. Everyone knows protein shakes are a great way to sneak in extra protein, build more muscle, even replace meals and burn more fat. The problem is the highest quality protein typically absorbs at around 40%. One way to fix this and dramatically increase how quickly and effective your protein shake digests is to add 2 to 3 capsules of Masszymes into your shake. One research study showed that pre-digested protein during a meal increased muscle growth significantly. To take advantage of this, just blend the open capsules into your shake, and within 15 minutes or less, the enzymes will have begun to break down the protein into amino acids. This can make your shakes at least 2 to 3 times more potent. Some people do this and sip on their shake while lifting to provide their muscles with a steady stream of amino acids during their workout. To save 10% on Masszymes, use the code SHAKE10, that's SHAKE10, at masszymes.com. That's SHAKE10 at masszymes.com.
And I think, Wade, I think what you're saying here, and I would add, losing a loved one or losing a family member. So for me, it was interesting because I lost my dad in the few years prior to becoming a dad. So for me, that was an interesting, Berta Bushnell, who's based near you, she describes it as like the clock, the hand on the clock. I went from somebody's son, and then the clock started to shift, and now all of a sudden I'm dad, and I'm less somebody's son than I used to be. So my whole role on this planet has changed. The clock has actually struck. And I think the interesting thing that if you make space for that and you allow for that, your body's pretty darn smart. So in other words, like prior to having a kid, if I missed a few hours of sleep, I was miserable the next day, couldn't function or anything else. Once you have a kid, like you might miss a whole night of sleep and you feel fine the next day. You're just, rocking and rolling, you know what you need to do. So it's almost like your physiology and your biology just completely shift when those hands on the clock change. And as long as you make space for that and you kind of understand that that happens automatically and you don't try to force anything, it'll kind of happen and take you on this journey. But I think we're so used to being in such control, and we're so used to forcing everything and really working for it, that we can't let go enough. And I think that if there's one thing that I kind of help people with, it's that understanding. And I just had a call right before this with a woman who just had some surgery, and she's just like, I got to get back to the gym. I got to do this. And, she just had her neck cut open. She's got a big, thing right here. And I'm like, hey, like right now, be a little easy on yourself. But remember that right now, even if I told you to go do 1,000 burpees in your garage, like that's not what's going to be good for you. But what's going to be good for you is walking into the garage, pedaling a few times on your bike, picking up a kettlebell a couple of times and leaving, because we're just trying to anchor that habit of getting into the garage, but we're not judging what happens in the garage right now. All we're doing is maintaining that habit so that the wheels don't fall off. And when you are ready to go crush it again, you don't have to start at zero, because the routine of going into the garage at 10 a.m. never left. Yes. Right. So I think one of the things that we've been conditioned, there's this and we're seeing this in other places now too. We're conditioned to really shame ourselves when we don't exercise hard enough or when we eat poorly. And that creates this incredibly negative cascade of emotions that has unknown consequences. Right. So I think that getting away from all that is a big part of the journey, and a big part of getting the most out of whatever it is you do, whatever kettlebell you swing, whatever Peloton you cycle with, whatever. If your energy and your attitude in terms of what you're doing and how you're doing it is on point, you're going to get more out of that activity. But when you're shaming yourself and using willpower to get on the bike, the results aren't going to be there waiting for you.
I hear it. I think that's a great component, because there's so many people, both in the unfit and the fit category, that are leveraging guilt or an externalized version of their value in the world as opposed to their internalized version. And of course, in a perfect world, everybody would be fit, healthy, happy, and living their best life on purpose and on point. But, the reality is life is dynamic, and to a certain point, there's a certain amount of degeneration that starts to happen. In speaking to that, how do you address people, for example, who maybe had extremely high levels of fitness for, the college athletes, or maybe even professional athletes, or people who identified as a quote unquote super fit person, and then they start to age, or they start to go through life things, and all of a sudden they can't do the things, and it's causing a bit of an identity crisis or things like that. They have to make readjustments to how they look in their life. And what's that like for you and for those individuals? How do you go and approach that?
Well, it's kind of interesting, right? Because I think, the universe sends you people that are ready for your message, right? So most of those types of people that come to my door have broken themselves so many times that they're ready to kind of do this new program, right? So in other words, people that are in that camp in terms of my clientele, they've tried the thing that looked sexy or that Instagram told them was going to work, or the quick fix or the powerlifting meet, and it didn't work. They either broke themselves, or they weren't happy with the result, or they hurt themselves, or they, something else, some other, wheel fell off. And so fortunately, the people that come to me are pretty open. And maybe it's because I've got 100 and some odd hours of podcasts out there and everything else. So it's interesting that my methods it's a real back to basics approach. I use, a lot of kettlebells, and the cornerstone of it is really making an integrated body, right? So, and this has to do with my own journey, kind of putting my own pieces back together. That's why the podcast is called Stacked, because our posture, our body is a stack of joints, right? And so a lot of our compensations, injuries, and everything else, it has to do with problems in our posture. And so when you look at the types of strength exercises and programs I write, it's really to add a lot of integrity and durability to the body. So most of those people, the college football player, whatever it might be, they say they want to achieve what they achieved at 18, but really they just want to feel how they felt at 18.
That's a very good distinction, I think.
And once they start to feel like they can get out of bed in the morning without pain, they don't really care that their bench isn't what it used to be,
right?
Or, their back squat. Ultimately, their goal wasn't what they thought it was. So there's this like giving people what they need disguised as what they want, and assuming that it's going to work, and it pretty much does. If you find your way to my door, then you're ready to jump on the trade with the way that I program.
You made a really good distinction here, and that is kind of like the internal representation as opposed to what the external association is. And so oftentimes we think of, and you said something I haven't heard before, which is it's not necessarily they want to achieve that. Okay, I've got a 500-pound squat and a 400-pound bench press and a 600-pound deadlift. I remember those days. They're far behind me. And when you refer to it, it's like you want to feel like you did back then. Like right. It's okay if you're only benching 150 or something, right. But you want to feel like you did when you were at that point. And I think that is a key distinction about the value of being quote unquote healthy, is that you're both, you're fit, but you're feeling good in your fitness, not feeling I'm fit but dying towards it.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about kettlebells and why you like to use kettlebells. What's different about them, say, than other forms of exercise and things like that. So talk to me about why you expose people to kettlebells.
Yeah. And, a big part of it is like, getting into adding durability or adding function to your stack, to your posture. There's no better tool, right? So in other words, when you look back like 100 years ago and you look at Sandow, like pressing, a bench with 3 people sitting on it as an example, like these old school strongmen from 100 years ago. So that guy could never, ever shoulder press a bench with 3 people sitting on it, but he could bench press a bench with 3 people sitting on it. So what it is, if you look at just as an example, like the bench press, you're actually pushing the weight away from you and getting yourself beneath the weight to the point where you can lock your elbow and then use your stack to support the weight. So in some respects, there's this idea that kettlebells, they create a scenario where every exercise is a total body exercise. If you're doing a shoulder press or a military press, as we call it, if you're doing a one-arm military press, basically every muscle in your body is tight except your shoulder. Whereas if you look at like the conventional, dumbbell press, there's just max tension and tone in the trap and in the shoulder, and we're just like pumping it up. But if you think about in terms of kettlebells, and by the way, a kettlebell military press is more like an Arnold press if you're using dumbbells, right? Because you're coming down from the full rack position in this really full range of motion and going all the way overhead to a full lockout. But when I say every muscle is tight, the feet are literally grabbing the ground. The quads are tight, the glutes are tight, the abs are tight, the lats are tight. And all of a sudden, that arm, you're just basically pushing this rock, this tight structure away from the bell. And so there's this amazing, it's the closest comparison is actually rock climbing. So if you've ever done like indoor bouldering, when you first go and it's your first time, you're a strong guy. So you'd probably, I don't know if you've ever done this, but like if you've ever bouldered, you're a strong guy. So you're going to get like super white knuckled and you're going to be holding on to these like pigeons that flew into the wall. And you're going to be holding on for dear life and trying to do this. But what you're going to learn is the more force you can put into that little hold at the bottom with your big toe, the more pressure you can put into that, the less you actually have to grip this little one up top. Right. So the easier it is, and all of a sudden, the further you can reach. So there's this integration in kettlebells. And for me, I was trying to retrain my body to work maximally well after getting, my neck is still, it's funny because like my coaches and spiritual teachers would never say your head's messed up. Never say your neck is messed up. Never put it out in the universe like that. But I'll do it just for the show. Like today, like if you scanned my neck, it isn't all that great. There's not a ton of integrity in there because I got smashed in the side of the head. But when I was retraining my body to be integrated and durable, there was no better place to stop than the kettlebell because the entire body is involved in every single move. And the last thing I'll tack on, I'm sure you're familiar with the homunculus, which is basically the sensory system. And if you look, it's like a big cartoon guy. He's got massive hands, massive feet, and a massive tongue. Well, that's because those are the areas of the body where we have the most sensory nerves, right? And so if you think about, if I'm doing a kettlebell press, my feet are, I'm barefoot as I always am. Your feet are grabbing the ground. So you're getting that sensory input. That's running up the legs. Your core is tight. Your glutes are tight. Your quads are tight. And you're also gripping the kettlebell like you're trying to crush it. And in fact, if you're going maximally heavy, you might even have something like a stress ball in your other hand that you can crush as you're pressing this up. So that homunculus is essentially at work and you're feeding the system. And again, you're feeding the entire body for every move. And that's why it tends to work so well and tends to carry over so well into sports, which is why smart people like Dan John call it a fat burning athlete builder, because it is this amazing physiological experience and the body takes it real seriously.
Super cool. And maybe one of the best definitions I've ever heard of someone explaining lifting with kettlebells and its difference between lifting weights. What are some of the other things that you feel is unique about the programs that you run for people to kind of get them into their kind of best self? I don't know what the word I would use on that, but I think it seems about right.
Well, there's two kind of cornerstones, right? And I love Dr. Mark Cucuzzella's definition of health. And his definition of health is, can you burn your own fat for fuel? It's like, oh, like, that's a fantastic definition of health. And I agree with that. So I would say that is a big part of it. How do we get people's bodies more likely to burn fat for fuel? And number two, how do we improve, which is basically the same thing, how do we improve their relationship with oxygen and CO2? Because a lot of people walking around right now, they're walking around without an ideal respiratory system, which skews their ability to burn fat. It increases their reliance on glucose. It increases lactic acid production during exercise and basically makes you feel like you're running a marathon if you're only walking around the block, the less efficient you are, right? So when you look at, the programs I write on the kettlebell side, there's this massive focus on, and it depends on what phase of training, but if someone's new, the first block of training is very focused on integrating their body through what I just described with kettlebells. During that same phase, how do we increase their body's use of oxygen? Well, number one is nasal breathing. I've been talking about this for a long time. Nasal breathing is a massively important piece, especially during exercise. And, Patrick McEwen taught me, especially during sleep, because those are the two periods of time. Sleep is just the easiest time because you're not conscious anyway. You might as well tape your mouth shut and breathe through your nose. So you get 8 hours of practice that you can hopefully carry over into the day. Whereas most people might try to, practice some breath work during the day and hope it carries them through the night. And chances are your mouth's going to pop open during the night and you're going to rehearse the negative pattern. But anyways, so nasal breathing is maximally important. I do this a lot with all of our training, but we also do breath holds. And so with our RUNGA events, as an example, I drop bikes and ski ergs. We have all sorts of aerobic equipment. We also do kettlebell carries with breath holds. So what we'll do, as an example, is we might have everybody pedaling an assault bike or a fan bike at 45 or 50 RPM. And every minute on the minute, we'll exhale our air and maintain our intensity. Now we'll start with 3 seconds. We'll build to 5 seconds, 7 seconds, 9 seconds. If you're Ben Greenfield or someone, you'll get to 12 seconds, 15 seconds. And we'll do that every minute on the minute. So what happens when you do that, the really interesting thing about exercise, Wade, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but the really interesting thing about exercise and fitness in particular, fitness is an adaptation that's responding to what's happening at the muscles, right? So even aerobically, we think we have to sprint and lose our breath and mess up our respiration to work hard, but we're only doing that to work our legs hard enough so they adapt. Well, when you exhale your air and maintain speed, and you can do this running, you can even do this walking, you can do this on a bike, you can do it on a rower, you're creating the deficit of oxygen and nutrients at the muscles just as you would if you were at a heart rate of 180 instead of 125. And the longer you hold your breath, the more you're depriving the body of the nutrients and oxygen it needs, and therefore making them more susceptible to those nutrients and oxygen when they become available again. So you're actually doing the same thing. And that's why you can A, improve fitness dramatically very quickly, and B, why you can do this type of training every single day, because you're not building the same lactic acid or muscle damage. You're not destroying yourself. You're not fatiguing your central nervous system with massive sprints. All you're doing is every minute on the minute, exhaling your air. And we'll do that with kettlebell carries as well. I've got this, I call it death by carries. And this is a fantastic workout. I would love you to do it. You should do it right on your street there. Wave to my old house. So you carry a kettlebell overhead in your weak arm, right? Mm-hmm. Or you can call it your strong arm. So you carry it overhead as long as you can on your strong side. When you lose integrity, you start to shift over, drop it to the rack position, walk as far as you can until you lose integrity. When you lose integrity, you drop it to the suitcase position. Then you switch sides and you go to your stronger side. So it's funny. Sometimes like people like Dan John, they call it the strong side and the stronger side instead of the weak side and the strong side. But then you do the same thing over here, and we'll repeat that for 15 to 20 minutes, just going overhead, rack, suitcase, other side, overhead, rack, suitcase. And while you're doing that, we'll incorporate exhalation holds every minute on the minute for 3 to 5 seconds. And so you're integrating posture, strength, breath, respiration. It's a magical exercise. And you'll see, again, postures change immediately, because a lot of, especially guys that have spent a lot of time under the bar, they've got the round shoulders, maybe some trap tightness. Their pecs are really dominating everything they do. But a lot of that's chicken or the egg with the breath. And when you start playing with your breath while there's a weight over your head, you can't chest breathe. You can't upper trap breathe. So you start to actually use the diaphragm. So you'll see massive change in posture. Honestly, in this week, I just had all these guys. in 1 week, postures changed pretty significantly just from retraining this stuff. So that's kind of like I guess a pretty decent teaser of some of the stuff that we work on. That's probably unique to RUNGA's programs compared to some others.
That's great. So maybe you can share with people a little bit more about how they can get involved, where they can get checked out, how they can go about getting involved with your courses when the next ones are coming up, how they reach you, all this sort of stuff. Because I think this is a very unique and cool way to look at restarting someone's program or making that adjustment because of one of those life things. Can you kind of outline that for us?
Yeah, 100% Wade. So, RUNGA is rungalife.com. That's our website. All of our events are there. Of course, now we've got an event in October, but most of the stuff we're doing right now is is private, because that's just the way the world works right now. So you call us up, we'll shack an event up. We can, ship our bag of tricks anywhere in the country. So we've been operating on this container system now. So if there's a state where that's going to be friendly to us, or you own the whole property, give us a call. We'll drop it there. We'll drop all of our equipment. So that's RUNGA. In terms of my distance training programs, that's under my personal, just Coach Joe DI, which is .com. And if someone is, dealing with any of these kind of massive life changes, that's kind of what I do. So there's every case is very unique, but most of these people, they need to focus on breathing and exercises that more or less rehearse what they're trying to teach their bodies. And I think that that's the big thing, is understanding that everything is related and everything feeds each other. There's no changing just one thing. And I think the more there's a trauma or a life change, the more they think it's just the diet that needs to change, because they're burying what they're dealing with over here. It's just the diet. It's my diet that's really fallen off. Well, your diet is shacking up your emotional system, and your emotional system is not feeling too great. So understanding that interconnectedness is a massively important piece of those people's situation. So, but yeah, it's Coach Joe DI on all platforms: YouTube, Instagram, Facebook.com. And then RUNGA is RUNGA, RUNGA life.com. And on Instagram, it's just RUNGA Life as well.
Joe, anything you'd like to say to our audience, words of inspiration or ideas or things that they might want to consider before we sign off?
Yeah, sure, Wade. I'm just, I'm grateful for you having me. This is our second show together, and I appreciate the time and energy and sharing, what I have to share with your audience. I'm honored and excited to share. And in terms of the audience, I hope that maybe you took something new from this. And I think that this time we're in right now, it's this, it's this big reboot, it's this time, if there was ever a time, and like Wade said, no one's doing it for you. There's no, we'll spend 50 grand per household on God knows what, but we're not going to send vitamin C and vitamin D to every house in America. So there's no one that's going to do it for you. And as Wade said, in fact, they might even be paddling in the opposite direction, right? So it is kind of this every man for themselves. No one's going to take responsibility. It's not, your neighbor's fault that, you're sick. It's our fault. It's our responsibility to do what we need to do to be the best, most productive human being on the planet. And that means eating how you should eat, eating how we've evolved to eat, eating in a way that's responsible. I was just, I just recorded a show, just a solo show for my podcast. It's going to go live tomorrow. And it's like, with all these signs, all of this marketing to push people in the direction that the mainstream wants them to go, imagine if we were combating the obesity crisis with this level of propaganda, right? Or pushing away sugar. Imagine if, every candy bar said, hey, this is what's actually a danger to you and your neighbors, yes. And if you buy apples, then you say, hey, that's a, imagine a 1 to 5 scale. Every food you buy, this is an irresponsible food to be consuming during this COVID crisis. This is a highly responsible food. And it's crazy when you look at the very clear sort of, or the amount of effort and resource that's gone into pushing us into this way of thinking or into these interventions, when we should be pushing people to improving their own health and becoming more empowered. And I'll tack one thing on. There was a strange shift over the last, we'll say 80 years. When you look at what I'll call propaganda inside the United States during World War II, it was telling people to start their own gardens, victory gardens, grow your own food. The most patriotic thing you can do is stay fit, stay healthy. You had Jack LaLanne on TV talking about, not sitting too much and consuming fish oil. Like, the guy was brilliant. But somewhere along the way, we went from this relationship with our government and society where we had each other's back, and government was very much a partner in our individual decision making, right? Grow your own food, etc. To the relationship today, which can only be described as strict parenting. Mm-hmm. And if there's one thing I learned at college, it's the kids with the strictest parents go the craziest and get involved with the most bad decisions and the most drug use and the worst relationships with alcohol. And it's the kids that are empowered to make their own decisions in high school and in their adolescence that know how to carry themselves when their parents aren't around. And so this highly parental relationship we're seeing right now I'm nervous just about what happens when we all go to college and we're faced with, face-to-face decision-making. And so we shall see. But I guess my sign off is like, you're responsible for yourself. Take responsibility for your own health, your own body, and your own longevity. And that's how we'll get through this whole thing.
Joe, thanks for joining us so much today. And for all our listeners, make sure you check out Joe's site with all of the links that are in the show notes. And of course, if you're looking for a reboot, getting started again, getting back at it, there's no better place to go than to go see Joe and his team, or have his team come to you. Thanks so much for joining us today. We'll see you again on the next episode of the Awesome Health Podcast. I'm WT Lightheart from Bioptimizers. Take your health into your hands.
At Bioptimizers, our mission is to fix digestion. And a cornerstone of digestion is gut flora. P3OM is our patented probiotic formula. In fact, we call it the Navy SEALs of probiotics. You see, strong proteolytic or protein digesting activity is paramount to having a healthy gut flora. And of course, P3OM provides that. The good news is, unlike weaker probiotics, P3OM survives the digestion process. What it does is it basically multiplies the good guys while protecting you against pathogens, or what some people call the bad guys. P3OM really helps to rebuild your digestion. And what that allows you to do is to maximize nutrient uptake, energy, and metabolism. To find out more of how P3OM can help you, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.